This is a reflection of my recent Cape York trip. Stick it through to the end, I think you'll find it interesting. I'll just give you a quick rundown of how things are organised. The Max Tracks never came off the roof. I got stuck twice on a beach and managed to get myself out by moving a bit of sand and lowering the tyre pressures a bit more. The awning there below the Max Tracks has been used just about every night. Not tonight because I'm going minimalist tonight to make it easy to pack up. The two boxes hold light stuff, fishing gear in the smaller one, and other things like spare filters and so on in the large box. And on the other side of the roof I have got a RV3 tent which never came off the roof. I never had bad weather that I needed it. I've also got a couple of tubes. One's got fishing rods in it. This one in the centre here has got my ridge pole with a built-in LED light. In the back of the car, the box around the fridge has proved really useful. I can put lots of things on top of it when I'm organising myself. The fridge has been an absolute boon. In the tropics it kept the drinks cold and food fresh. Not much left in it now. A bit of cheese, a few drinks, some milk, the compulsory chocolate, but never missed a beat. In the back here, in the black box in the centre, is my compressor, and the khaki bag has got my compressor lines and tyre gauges in. I use them regularly to raise and lower tyre pressures. One water container. I've got another 50 litres behind that black box. A box in the corner with food items in, again rather depleted. The black box with the outer handles has essentials that I need, bug spray and UV cream particularly, and then down the bottom I've got this slide out tray which has got all my quick to get out things like tea and coffee and pasta and rice and tea bags and all that sort of stuff. And then a little canister stove which has been very useful for quick stops. I also have a regular LPG stove that works off the coloured cylinders. I only used that when I was in situ. And I also had an induction cooktop which I used when I had 240 volt power in some caravan parks, so very useful. In the back of the car, all my boxes contain everything else that I need, and it might look like there's a lot of boxes and a lot of stuff, but I used all of it. Clothes bag, kitchen items, utensils and so on, bowls, plates, food, a second box of food there, my laptop which got used every day, a bag of dirty clothes, that's scintillating, and then round to the other side I had two bigger boxes. The top one contains all my cooking gear and other stoves, and the bottom one has got my spares, a toolkit, recovery gear and the like. To a cabin, I've got my small GPS which plugged along. My HEMA unfortunately died. I think that the battery has just given up out of old age. So I'll sort that out when I get back. The little orange thing there is a satellite communicator. I can send messages home. I'll let my wife know that everything's okay. I have a regular check-in every morning so she knows exactly where I am. This provides a link, sends it to email. She can then open the link and find on the map of Australia exactly where I am. So no fun and games here. Very useful piece of equipment. I can also use it to send text messages, but it's very laborious. So I generally wait until I've got phone coverage. Down the bottom here, GoPro boxes, my drone, and then a seat organiser with all the other stuff that I need from time to time, torches and chargers and all that sort of thing. So there you go. That's the setup. The front of the car looks like the red dirt from hell. It's going to take me a week to get all this red dirt off, and probably several months to get the dust that's got past the seals into the vehicle. But hey, That's all part of it. And good old Luxy has not missed a beat. I put a new starter battery in it before I went. I've had no battery problems, I've had no tyre problems, I've had no mechanical problems. Very similar to the trip when I went to the Kimberley, which was the same. It's a very good and capable four-wheel drive and a very reliable vehicle. So I've had it since new and it does the job time and time again. Good old Luxy. My stretcher tent, I've just put it onto a ground sheet because the ground is just powdered dust. That takes about 5 minutes to pack up in the morning. I've put the cover on it because we're not in the tropics anymore. Quite possibly it'll be a damp night as well. But it's the last night, so who cares? I think I'm going to light a campfire a bit later on and sit around that for a short while before I go to bed, and I might reflect on the trip. And a bit of info on the tyres. They are Bridgestone Jeweler 697 ATs, 285 17s, standard rim size for a HiLux. Unfortunately, I might have liked to have gone to a 70, but I just can't fit it in my shed. So standard wheels and rims. Battle damage. I had a bit of an argument with a clay ledge, but that'll knock out alright. And then someone cunningly disguised a 3-foot post as a 3-foot post at Fruitbat Falls, and I didn't see it and reversed into it. But hey, that's what bar works for, isn't it? It saved the panel, potentially, and I'm glad that I've got it, and that's just a badge of honour as far as I'm concerned. Other than that, pinstripes, of course, stone chips, of course, but par for the course. And as I just said before, I couldn't be happier with the way that the vehicle performed. Absolutely outstanding. Toyota, oh what a feeling. And for the record, filters on the snorkel, do they work? Well, I deliberately didn't put one on the trip up to Cape York, and the air filter was full of dust, so was the airbox. I cleaned it all out. I put this on. Last time I checked, no dust and a clean filter. I think that speaks for itself. The dust is on the outside, not down in the airbox. So it's time to reflect. I've been away for exactly 6 weeks. I had to beat a COVID scare to get up to Queensland. I had to beat a COVID scare in Queensland to get back to South Australia. As I speak, Cairns has gone into lockdown. Luckily I didn't go there on the way back. I bypassed it because I was concerned about the possibility, and that's one of the reasons they've let me back in. So what were the highlights? Well, the drive up was Broken Hill, Cobar, Burke, and then up across the Queensland border. There was no COVID checkpoint when I got to Queensland. And then I travelled to Charters Towers, had to skirt round Townsville, which was in its last day of lockdown at the time, then travelled to Cairns, Cooktown, and up the coast from there. The Peninsula Development Road, commonly known as the PDR, varied from very good to extremely rough. The further north you went, the worse it was. The section north from the Weipa turnoff to Bamaga was by far the worst. The corrugations were pretty severe. I shook loose my radio antenna. I constantly had to rearrange the load because it got thrown around, but I made it. Once I got to Bamaga, the roads generally were quite good. One of the highlights was doing sections of the Overland Telegraph track, or the OTT, doing a couple of the water crossings. I'll quite honestly admit that I chickened out on some of the more severe crossings and drops down into creeks. I saw cars that did panel damage. I saw cars that filled up with water, particularly at Nolan's Brook. I saw quite a few cars on the back of flatbeds coming back from that area. To be honest, why anyone would travel 2,000 or 3,000 kilometres and then put their car in harm's way is a bit beyond me. I always was of the philosophy that I wanted to get back in one piece, and largely I have. And some of those entries into water crossings were just insane. Highlights. Well, wonderful waterfalls virtually everywhere I went. Really spectacular, on a par with any that I saw in New Zealand. The tip of Cape York itself is beautiful country. I enjoyed staying at Seisha, Loyalty Beach, places like that. Some of the sunsets over the sea were spectacular. A lot of people rave about sunsets over the sea. Well, when you come from Adelaide, that's par for the course, because Adelaide looks west, but never mind. They were good. I enjoyed the warm temperatures. It was 33, 34 every day, and rarely dropped below about 24 at night. Sometimes sleeping was a bit of a chore, but I did have a little portable fan which made life a bit more easy in terms of getting to sleep. I just had to remember to turn it off, otherwise the battery operated would be flat in the morning. The fishing was underwhelming. I don't know what it was, but every time I go anywhere, it's always the wrong tides, the wrong time of year, etc., etc. There was virtually no tidal movement after the full moon in July, and the fishing suffered accordingly. I caught a lot of fish, but they were all fairly small. I talked to people who caught big fish. They all caught them on the big tides around July the 24th, 25th, which is when I was doing my trip up to the tip and all the touristy bit up there with the photos and so on, so I missed out on the fishing. I had a lot of firsts. I saw a cassowary, in fact 2 cassowaries in the wild, which I've never seen before. I've only ever seen them in zoos or bird exhibits. They didn't seem in the least bit concerned that I was right next to them. One came right up to the car window, got some great photos and some great footage. I saw a palm cockatoo that I've never seen before. Again, great footage and very close. I saw a turtle nesting or laying eggs on a beach, which is another first. I saw lots of sharks. Some on the end of lines, some just swimming around. None of them wanted to come and join me on the beach. Again, some spectacular footage of somebody else hooked up to a shark, which you probably have seen already. The scenery in general was interesting. It was similar to the Kimberley in many ways, but quite different, because the Kimberley is very dry and hot. It's a bit like the Flinders, but with water, whereas the far north of Cape York is a bit more tropical. In fact, to get to the tip you have to drive through rainforest. I didn't like the rainforest much. It was full of mosquitoes, and mosquitoes like me. I did see some beautiful blue Ulysses butterflies, quite a few of them in fact, but as usual far too fast to record either with video or by photo, but beautiful nevertheless. I saw a platypus in a rainforest creek. I saw dingoes in northern South Australia. In fact, they were just over the border in Queensland. It wasn't safe to drive at night with all the wildlife. I did see lots of wallabies, but very few kangaroos. The few that I've seen have been more in central Queensland and northern South Australia. I didn't want to take the risk of driving at night and possibly hitting them. Apart from the damage to the animal, there's also the unfortunate damage to a car and the possibility that it could end your trip. So once the sun started to go, that was it for me. I pulled over and made camp. Some of the campsites were absolutely outstanding. I did spend a lot of time in caravan parks, purely for convenience and the power. But the bush camps that I had, some of the places I went, absolutely beautiful. As I mentioned before, the car performed flawlessly. I had no mechanical issues. I had no tyre issues, and that's quite surprising given the roads. Both the towns of Bamaga and Seisha at the tip have mechanical workshops and people that do repairs, and they were packed. Sometimes bookings of up to a week needed to get work done. A lot of vehicles got damaged, a lot of caravans and campers got damaged, and people basically just had to sit and wait until they could get their car or their caravan looked at. Fortunately, I avoided all of that, and I put that down to the type of car, good preparation, and a bit of experience in driving on rough roads. I took recovery gear, I took spare parts, I took tools. Apart from tightening up a radio antenna bolt, nut and bolt, they basically stayed put. What did I take that I didn't need? Well, with the exception of the recovery gear that I've just mentioned and the spares and tools, virtually nothing. The only thing that I didn't use was the RV3 tent, which stayed on the roof for the entire time. The plan was to have that tent in the event of heavy rain, because it's a very waterproof tent, and an awning and side panels has its limitations. On one particular night when it did rain, I woke up, saw the rain sitting on top of the awning and decided to tip it off, and managed to put about 10 litres straight into the stretcher tent, which had no cover over it. That was a very soggy night's sleep. I ended up taking way too much food. I'm bringing about half of it back. When I was in Cairns, I got a lot of meat cryovac. With the fridge running at about -4, the meat stayed basically frozen for the entire time before I used it. And I had plenty of meal bases and things like that, and bought some vegetables which I added to it. It doesn't really matter. All the things that I didn't use will just go into my camping food kitchen storage, and I'll use them on future trips. Given that I was travelling through outback New South Wales and outback Queensland and South Australia on the way back, I'm glad that I had plenty of warm clothes. This is the first night that I've actually had a fire. So campfire cooking didn't happen, but that's okay. The camp oven's nice and clean. I think I've probably travelled about 12,000 kilometres. Some of that was forced upon me because I went up through New South Wales, but of course with the border closure I couldn't come back that way. The only way I could come back was through Innerminka or Birdsville. I chose Birdsville because it's more direct, and it was okay. The road was a bit rough in places, but overall not too bad. I maintained a good speed, 90 to 100 kilometres on most of it. However, it did add a lot of distance to the trip. I did a lot of poking into side tracks to have a look at things. I went out to see a lot of attractions, particularly in the tropics, and that added a considerable distance to the overall kilometerage. But if you don't go and look, you don't see. Apart from the chore of cleaning the car, and it's now well and truly due for an oil change, would I do the trip again? Yes, I would, in a heartbeat. It was absolutely spectacular. And if you've watched some of the videos that I've done up to now, you will see the sort of scenery and amazing sights that I saw. Will I do it again? Probably not. I don't plan to go back to the Kimberley either, and that was equally as spectacular, but in different ways. My car's getting pretty long in the tooth now. It's 10 years old and it's done 150,000. It's not to say it's about to fall apart. I think how well it coped with the trip is testimony to what a good vehicle it is, but I doubt that I would attempt another trip of this length in that car. Did I enjoy it? Absolutely. Did I miss home? Absolutely. But sometimes that's the penalty you have to pay to get out and see this sort of stuff. Would I recommend it to other people to do? If you have the right vehicle and the right preparation, anybody can do this trip. The two questions that I have been asked while I've been away are, firstly, you're travelling alone. Why is that? Well, it's quite simple, really. My wife went on the Kimberley trip with me. She put up with 8 weeks towing a camper trailer around and red dust and everything. She had a great time, but that was probably enough for her. So I did this trip with her blessing, and I haven't really felt alone. There have been plenty of people to talk to. You strike up conversations when you're out camping. You strike up conversations when you're in caravan parks, having tea at the hotel, which I did a few times, those sort of things. I never felt lonely. I'm not fazed at all by camping out by myself, and I don't feel insecure camping out by myself. So being alone, hey, if you don't go, you don't see. And my only choice on this trip was to do it by myself, or it wasn't going to happen. So I did it by myself. The other question is one that everybody wants to know, and that is, how much did it cost? Well, it's a very complex question to answer. It cost a lot to get prepared. It cost a lot in terms of car servicing, making sure that I had all the bits and pieces that I needed, making sure that I had the food that I needed. Most of the camping gear I already had, but that was a cost. The biggest cost for the whole trip was fuel, of course. 12,000 kilometres with a car that does about, on rough roads, 12 litres per 100. Fuel averaged in cost from $1.40 in the bigger towns up to over $2 in some of the more remote areas, but I never paid more than $2.20 a litre. And when I compare that with the $2.65 a litre that I paid for fuel on the Tanami track, it's really quite good. I've heard people say that you can work on cost of about $1 a kilometre. Well, I'll tell you now, I didn't spend anything like $12,000 to do this trip. I allowed 10. Apart from fuel and accommodation and bits and pieces here and there and the odd ice cream, I spent very little. I did do a tour to Thursday Island. Why would you go to the tip of Cape York and not go to Thursday Island? That was $250. I had planned to do a fishing charter, but it's been so busy up here this year. Everyone's saying it's the biggest year they've had because, of course, no one can go overseas. Everywhere was booked out. Any mechanical repairs were booked out days in advance. Caravan parks were often hard to get a place in, and all the fishing charters were booked out days in advance. I wasn't prepared to stick around for up to a week to get a fishing charter, so that didn't happen. That would have probably been another $250 or thereabouts. I didn't do any helicopter flights. I've got a drone. I can see everything from that height anyway. I doubt very much it will be more than about $4,000 or $5,000. To be perfectly honest, to have 6 weeks away and see the things that you can see in this part of the world, Cape York, for that amount of money, it's pretty cheap entertainment. I hope you've enjoyed the videos. I enjoyed making them, I enjoyed taking the footage, I enjoyed the experience. If you haven't been to Cape York yet, put it on your bucket list. I did. It's now ticked off.